12 hours. That's how long it took Sheriff Chris Nanos to assign homicide detectives. Not after days of searching. Not after weeks of failed recovery. Within hours. When law enforcement escalates this early, the timeline doesn't unfold gradually. It shifts immediately. Sheriff Nanos would later say publicly, "There is something that is not right here." That statement came early, before the public understood the full timeline, before the investigative picture had fully formed. The decision came first. The explanation came later. When institutional leadership moves this fast, it usually reflects information the public has not yet seen. A shift that happens internally before it can be explained externally. When experienced sheriffs depart from the full procedural progression within hours of an initial report, the trajectory has been altered immediately. Sheriff Nanos told the public Nancy might still be alive. His resource deployment reflected a level of concern beyond a routine missing person response. He described being disturbed by what he saw at the scene. He stated directly, "There is something that is not right here." Professional law enforcement executives rarely use words like disturbed in early public statements, unless something about the scene stood out immediately. They don't deploy major investigative resources based on intuition or speculation. The escalation happened before clarity. The deployment moved faster than explanation normally allows. Decisions like that are not made in uncertainty. They're made when uncertainty has already collapsed internally, even if the public cannot yet see why. The timeline tells a story that public statements cannot tell. It reveals institutional decision-making that operates on evidence foundations invisible to public scrutiny. Standard missing person investigations follow predictable progression patterns developed through decades of statistical analysis and resource management efficiency. Initial response focuses on high probability explanations that account for the vast majority of missing person cases. Medical emergencies that incapacitate individuals without immediate discovery. Voluntary departure situations involving family disputes, financial stress, or personal crisis. Accidental circumstances, including falls, vehicle accidents, or disorientation that result in individuals being unable to return home or communicate their location. Search and rescue protocols initiate systematic area coverage based on behavioral analysis, geographic probability assessment, and historical pattern recognition. Teams coordinate methodically through sectors determined by statistical likelihood of successful location. Family liaison specialists gather background information, medical history, financial circumstances, and relationship dynamics that might explain disappearance through non-criminal factors. Communication analysis begins with recent contact patterns, travel plans, appointment schedules, and routine disruptions that might indicate voluntary departure or emergency circumstances. Statistical analysis guides resource allocation decisions. Criminal abduction represents a small fraction of missing person cases investigated by law enforcement. The overwhelming majority resolve through location of individuals who left voluntarily, experienced medical emergencies, or encountered accidental circumstances. Homicide consideration typically occurs only after systematic elimination of high probability explanations, extended search efforts without success, and evidence discovery that suggests criminal activity. Standard progression often begins with an initial window focused on non-criminal explanations before criminal possibilities receive primary focus. Homicide detective assignment usually follows evidence discovery, not precedes it. Physical evidence suggesting violence. Witness statements indicating criminal activity. Background investigation revealing threats or conflicts. Sheriff Nanos did not follow the typical progression seen in many missing person cases. 12 hours, immediate homicide detective deployment, before the full systematic elimination of alternatives could be completed. Saturday night, 9:48 p.m., garage reported open. Early morning, 1:47 a.m., doorbell system disconnected. 2:28 a.m., pacemaker monitor disconnected. Sunday, around noon, Nancy reported missing. Investigators noted that this sequence raised immediate concern. Systems don't disconnect themselves in precise chronological order. Monitoring devices don't fail simultaneously by coincidence. The sequence suggests familiarity with Nancy's security and medical monitoring systems. Someone understood which systems provided alerts, which devices transmitted location data, which monitors would trigger emergency response. The systematic nature of these disconnections raised questions about planning, technical familiarity, and access to Nancy's daily living systems. It suggested awareness of which systems mattered and which needed to go silent first. The timing coincided with Savannah Guthrie's international travel for Olympic coverage. The timing raised questions about whether Nancy's vulnerability may have been known in advance when family response would be delayed, and when immediate assistance would be limited by distance and communication logistics. Professional travel schedules are determined weeks in advance through network coordination, accommodation arrangements, and international broadcasting logistics. This information is not publicly available in specific timeline detail. Ransom demands followed, but communication patterns investigators described as irregular. Multiple deadlines passed without credible proof of life. Standard kidnapping behavioral indicators were absent. Professional kidnapping investigations recognize specific patterns that characterize legitimate abduction for financial gain. Communication methods that protect criminal anonymity while maintaining negotiation capability. Payment demands structured to minimize law enforcement involvement. Proof of life protocols that confirm victim status. Investigators noted that several expected indicators were absent. Communication became erratic rather than systematic. Deadlines passed without explanation or rescheduling. No acceptable proof of life was provided that satisfied investigative requirements. Yet before this pattern analysis was complete, before systematic investigation had tested criminal kidnapping theories, before evidence collection had eliminated non-criminal explanations, Sheriff Nanos had made his critical decision. Saturday evening, initial briefings received. Sunday morning, homicide detectives assigned. The timeline fractures here. And once a timeline fractures this early, investigations do not return to normal progression. Standard protocol: search, recover, analyze, then escalate if evidence warrants. Actual protocol: immediate escalation to homicide investigation before analysis completion. This bypass demands explanation. Bunoktada kamuya achik verilar net deal about what triggered such immediate departure from standard procedures. But the decision itself is documented in public statements. The speed is recorded in press conference timelines. The departure from standard practice is undeniable through official confirmation. Sheriff Nanos encountered something in those initial briefings that eliminated uncertainty about investigative direction. Evidence characteristics that professional investigators recognize immediately as incompatible with standard missing person assumptions. Crime scene indicators that point towards specific criminal outcomes rather than accidental or voluntary circumstances. Background information that reveals conflicts, threats, or motives inconsistent with random disappearance. Communication evidence that suggests staging, deception, or misdirection rather than legitimate kidnapping for financial gain. The trigger evidence remains institutionally protected, but the reaction to that evidence was visible immediately, and reactions reveal reality long before explanations do. Experienced sheriffs develop decision velocity through accumulated case exposure over decades of law enforcement leadership. Crisis response recognition operates through pattern matching developed from hundreds of missing person cases, dozens of criminal investigations, and multiple homicide prosecutions that create professional judgment frameworks. Professional experience teaches sheriffs to recognize evidence characteristics that indicate specific criminal outcomes, physical scene indicators that suggest violence versus accident, background information patterns that reveal personal conflicts versus random targeting, communication analysis markers that distinguish legitimate kidnapping from staged deception, behavioral patterns from family members that indicate knowledge versus genuine confusion. Leadership experience accelerates institutional escalation when accumulated knowledge allows rapid elimination of statistical probabilities that would normally require systematic investigation. Sheriff departments nationwide maintain informal communication networks that share investigative experience, case development patterns, and professional recognition techniques. that accelerate decision-making during complex cases. Training programs expose sheriffs to case studies from other jurisdictions, providing pattern recognition education that allows faster identification of evidence characteristics requiring immediate specialized response. Professional conferences include presentations on investigative timing, resource allocation, efficiency, and decision-making under pressure that establish best practices for complex criminal cases. This institutional knowledge base can allow experienced executives to move faster than public explanation. When evidence patterns trigger immediate recognition that standard progression would compromise investigation effectiveness. Sheriff Nanos operates within this professional framework. His career includes exposure to case types that develop rapid assessment capabilities for evidence evaluation and resource allocation decisions. Professional judgment, developed through experience, allows institutional leaders to recognize when statistical probabilities do not apply to specific cases, when standard procedures would be inadequate, when extraordinary measures are justified by evidence characteristics. This framework explains rapid escalation capability. It does not explain what specific evidence triggered that escalation in Nancy Guthrie's case. Monday, public messaging begins, creating institutional contradiction that continues throughout the investigation. Sheriff Nanos confirmed homicide detective involvement while simultaneously maintaining public messaging that Nancy might still be alive. This dual-track approach creates psychological and institutional friction that demands analysis. Law enforcement agencies typically maintain optimistic public messaging during missing person cases to preserve family hope, encourage community cooperation, and avoid panic that might compromise ongoing search efforts. Public statements focus on recovery possibilities, search progress, and investigation advancement that suggests positive outcomes remain achievable through continued effort and resource commitment. This messaging serves multiple institutional purposes beyond family comfort. It maintains community engagement in search efforts. It prevents panic that might generate false leads or interfere with systematic investigation. It preserves operational security around investigative theories and suspect identification. Internal resource deployment often differs from public messaging, but such divergence typically develops gradually as evidence analysis eliminates recovery possibilities and criminal investigation becomes primary focus. The contradiction becomes significant when optimistic public messaging and pessimistic resource deployment occur simultaneously from the beginning of the investigation. Sheriff Nanos created this contradiction within 12 hours of the initial report. He described this case as requiring a two-angle approach. Search and rescue would continue hoping for recovery while criminal investigation prepared for alternative outcomes. This dual-track deployment indicates immediate recognition that evidence characteristics suggested criminal outcomes despite public messaging that maintained recovery possibilities. The friction between public hope and internal preparation reveals institutional assessment that statistical probabilities did not apply to this case from the earliest stages. Standard missing person cases allow gradual transition from optimistic to realistic resource allocation as evidence develops. Sheriff Nanos eliminated this transition period entirely. He deployed resources for the worst-case scenario while maintaining public messaging for the best-case scenario. This contradiction suggests evidence strength that made pessimistic preparation necessary despite public optimism requirements. Sheriff Nanos made a choice that professional investigations typically avoid during sensitive operations. He announced homicide detective involvement publicly, eliminating tactical advantages that operational security normally provides during complex criminal investigations. Professional investigations derive significant tactical benefits from maintaining secrecy around investigative approaches, suspect identification processes, and evidence analysis progress. Surveillance advantages multiply when subjects believe their activities remain undetected. Criminal behavior often continues, providing additional evidence for prosecution. Communication monitoring becomes more valuable when subjects feel secure from law enforcement attention. Behavioral intelligence gathering improves dramatically when criminals think their deception strategies are working. Subjects reveal accomplice involvement, disclose operational methods, and demonstrate criminal patterns that support comprehensive prosecution. physical evidence collection benefits from subjects who continue normal activities, unaware that their movements, communications, and associations are under systematic observation. Witness cooperation often improves when potential informants believe they are providing information to routine investigation rather than major criminal case that might generate retaliation concerns. Public disclosure eliminates all these advantages immediately and permanently. It alerts subjects to law enforcement attention, potentially causing behavioral changes that compromise evidence collection. It signals investigative seriousness that may prompt destruction of evidence, elimination of accomplice cooperation, or flight from jurisdiction. Media attention generated through public disclosure complicates witness interviews, affects suspect behavior, and creates operational challenges that interfere with systematic investigation. Sheriff Nanos chose transparency, despite these substantial tactical costs. Decisions like that are rarely made without certainty about what investigators are facing. This choice suggests tactical advantages were already compromised, unnecessary, or superseded by other priorities. Evidence strength sufficient to proceed without surveillance benefits. Suspect identification advanced enough to make secrecy counterproductive. Community safety concerns that override operational considerations. Each explanation indicates different levels of investigative advancement that remain protected from public disclosure. Strong evidence foundation would support prosecution regardless of behavioral changes prompted by public attention. Advanced suspect identification would make continued surveillance redundant or impossible to maintain covertly. Community safety priorities would require immediate public awareness despite investigative complications. Bunoktada Kamuya, a Chuk-Veriler net deal about which factor dominated the decision to sacrifice tactical advantage for transparency. Sheriff Nanos committed county resources to a level typically associated with major felony investigations, creating institutional risk that extends far beyond individual case management. County-level budget approval mechanisms operate through systematic oversight structures that require documented justification for major investigative operations exceeding standard resource allocation parameters. Budget directors conduct quarterly reviews of departmental spending patterns, examining personnel, overtime costs, equipment deployment expenses, and operational resource utilization rates that affect overall county fiscal management. County commissioners evaluate law enforcement performance through metrics including case clearance rates, prosecution success percentages, community safety improvement statistics, and cost per outcome analysis that determines budget allocation for subsequent fiscal periods. Fiscal review boards examine investigative expenditures through detailed reporting requirements that document personnel hours, equipment costs, expert consultation fees, and operational expenses that must be justified through case development progress. Administrative oversight includes monthly departmental briefings where sheriffs present investigation status reports, resource utilization summaries, and outcome projections that support continued budget authorization for ongoing operations. Performance evaluation systems track sheriffs through community safety metrics, prosecution, cooperation, effectiveness, interagency coordination, success, and resource management efficiency that directly influence career advancement and political viability. Public accountability mechanisms include town hall meetings, county commission sessions, and media briefings, where sheriffs must explain resource allocation decisions to taxpayers who evaluate law enforcement effectiveness through visible results. Electoral accountability operates through voter assessment of sheriff performance during campaign periods when resource management, case success rates, and community safety outcomes become political evaluation criteria. Major investigations consume personnel time that cannot be allocated to other criminal cases, community policing initiatives, or routine public safety responsibilities. Specialized equipment deployment includes forensic analysis capabilities, digital investigation tools, communication monitoring systems, and evidence processing resources that represent significant per-day operational costs. Overtime expenditures for extended investigation shifts, weekend operations, and holiday coverage create budget pressures that affect department-wide resource availability throughout the fiscal year. Opportunity cost analysis reveals other criminal investigations receiving reduced attention. domestic violence cases with delayed response times, property crime investigations with minimal resource allocation, and community safety programs operating with skeleton staffing. Performance accountability systems measure sheriffs through prosecution, success rates, case clearance percentages, community safety statistics, and resource management efficiency that directly affect career advancement and political viability. Extended investigation without visible progress creates political vulnerability through media criticism, community questioning, and administrative review that examines decision-making processes and resource allocation justification. Sheriff Nanos has sustained this commitment without modification, reduction, or timeline adjustment that would typically occur when investigations fail to produce results proportional to resource investment. Sustained resource commitment requires ongoing justification to oversight authorities through documented evidence development, suspect identification progress, and prosecution preparation advancement. Administrative briefings must demonstrate investigative advancement sufficient to validate continued extraordinary resource allocation, despite absence of public prosecution progress. Budget justification operates through internal channels that remain protected from public accountability, but require substantial documentation of case development and evidence analysis. The sustainability of this approach demands investigative progress that justifies political risk and resource commitment through channels invisible to public scrutiny. Internal justification processes operate according to established protocols that balance investigation, integrity, with administrative accountability. Evidence review cycles typically involve systematic evaluation of physical evidence, digital analysis results, witness statement consistency, and investigative theory development that supports continued resource allocation. Documentation processes require detailed reporting of investigative activities, evidence collection results, suspect identification progress, and prosecution preparation advancement that validates ongoing operational costs. Oversight briefings include presentations to administrative leadership, coordination with prosecutorial authorities, and consultation with specialized investigative units that provide professional assessment of case viability. Prosecutorial coordination involves regular communication with district attorney offices, review of evidence sufficiency for various charges, and preparation of case materials that support eventual prosecution strategy. These internal processes create institutional framework for sustained investigation that operates independently of public visibility or media attention. Sheriff Nanos maintains access to evidence analysis, suspect identification development, and prosecution preparation progress that remains protected from public disclosure, but provides ongoing justification for resource commitment. The gap between internal justification and public visibility creates accountability tension that protects investigation integrity, while limiting community understanding of why extraordinary measures continue. Bu noktara kamuya, açık veriler net deal about specific content of internal justification processes, but their existence and continued validation is demonstrated through sustained resource commitment and consistent institutional messaging. 3 questions emerge from institutional timeline analysis that challenge public understanding of law enforcement decision-making under pressure. First, what evidence convinced Sheriff Nanos within 12 hours that standard missing person protocols were insufficient? The timeline demonstrates immediate escalation without systematic elimination of non-criminal alternatives. No patience for standard progression through search, recovery, and analysis phases that typically precede criminal investigation. No testing of high probability explanations that account for majority of missing person cases. No comprehensive family background analysis that might reveal voluntary departure or personal crisis circumstances. Professional investigators develop pattern recognition through years of case management experience. They identify evidence characteristics that indicate specific criminal outcomes versus accidental or voluntary circumstances. Physical evidence suggesting violence would require immediate forensic response, medical examination capabilities, and evidence preservation protocols designed for homicide prosecution. Background investigation revealing personal conflicts would indicate intimate crime requiring specialized interview techniques, relationship analysis, and motive assessment focused on close associates rather than stranger danger. Communication analysis indicating staging or deception would suggest criminal activity designed to misdirect investigation, while actual motives remain concealed through false narrative creation. Each possibility requires different investigative approaches, resource allocation priorities, and personnel expertise that must be deployed immediately to preserve evidence, integrity, and prosecution capability. Bunok Tarakamuya Achukveriler net deal about which evidence category dominated Sheriff Nanos' immediate recognition that this case required extraordinary response. But something triggered immediate pattern matching, professional recognition, and institutional certainty that eliminated standard procedural progression. Second, why sacrifice substantial tactical advantages for public transparency? Sheriff Nanos announced homicide involvement publicly, eliminating operational benefits that professional investigations typically preserve throughout suspect identification and evidence collection phases. Covert surveillance provides ongoing intelligence about criminal behavior, associate involvement, and operational methods that become unavailable once subjects understand they are under investigation. Communication monitoring yields evidence about criminal planning, accomplice coordination, and evidence concealment that disappears when subjects modify their behavior in response to public attention. Behavioral analysis benefits from subjects who continue normal activities, revealing patterns, associations, and vulnerabilities that inform tactical approaches and prosecution strategy. Evidence preservation improves when subjects remain unaware that their actions, communications, and movements are being documented for eventual prosecution use. Public disclosure eliminates these advantages permanently while creating operational challenges through media attention, community pressure, and suspect behavioral changes. Sheriff Nanos chose transparency despite these substantial operational costs, suggesting tactical advantages were already compromised, unnecessary for prosecution success, or superseded by other priorities. Evidence strength sufficient to support prosecution regardless of subject behavioral modifications would make covert surveillance redundant. Suspect identification advanced to the point where continued secrecy becomes counterproductive or impossible to maintain would favor public disclosure. Community safety concerns requiring immediate public awareness would override tactical considerations in professional law enforcement decision-making. Each explanation indicates different levels of case development that remain protected from public accountability. Third, how does sustained resource commitment get justified without visible prosecution progress? Major investigations require ongoing administrative approval through documented progress reports, evidence development summaries, and prosecution preparation updates that validate continued extraordinary resource allocation. County-level oversight includes budget review meetings, performance evaluation sessions, and resource utilization assessments that examine investigative efficiency and community safety benefits. Sheriff Nanos has maintained resource commitment at levels typically associated with active prosecution preparation despite absence of public arrests, suspect identification, or prosecution timeline announcements. Personnel allocation continues at extraordinary levels. Equipment deployment remains comprehensive. Overtime expenditures persist without modification or reduction that would typically occur in investigations lacking prosecution advancement. This requires internal justification to administrative oversight through evidence analysis reports, suspect identification development, and prosecution coordination activities that demonstrate investigative progress. Prosecutorial consultation provides professional assessment of evidence sufficiency, charge viability, and case preparation requirements that support continued resource investment. Evidence development documentation includes physical analysis results, digital investigation findings, and witness statement evaluation that validates ongoing investigative activities. The justification operates through administrative channels that remain protected from public disclosure but provide ongoing validation for extraordinary resource commitment. This internal accountability framework supports sustained investigation, despite public visibility gaps that create community questions about efficiency and progress. These questions reveal institutional tensions between transparency requirements and operational security, between public accountability and investigation integrity, between resource management and prosecution capability. Sheriff Nanos has navigated these tensions through consistent public messaging about case seriousness while maintaining institutional processes that protect evidence development and prosecution preparation. But the foundation of this navigation, the evidence, analysis, and developments that justify every decision, remains institutionally protected from the public accountability that could explain why extraordinary measures continue. The institutional record establishes what happened with undisputable clarity. 12-hour escalation from missing person report to homicide investigation deployment. Immediate resource allocation at levels typically reserved for confirmed criminal cases. Public announcement of extraordinary measures despite tactical costs. Sustained resource commitment without timeline modification. Consistent institutional messaging without approach adjustment. Ongoing justification through protected administrative channels. The institutional record remains incomplete on why these decisions were necessary. The evidence that triggered immediate escalation remains protected from public scrutiny. The analysis that justified bypassing every standard procedure remains classified within operational security requirements. The developments that continue to support extraordinary measures remain beyond public accountability systems that could explain institutional decision-making to community oversight. What the timeline reveals: Sheriff Nanos moved with institutional speed that departed from the full procedural sequence designed to prevent premature escalation. What the timeline conceals: the trigger evidence that made such speed necessary, justified, or inevitable. The escalation preceded public clarity. But internally, clarity may have already existed. The deployment did not create urgency. It revealed it. Professional law enforcement operates on evidence foundations, not speculative assumptions. Resource allocation requires documented justification, not intuitive guesswork. Institutional decisions demand empirical support, not emotional response. If Sheriff Nanos possessed evidence that justified immediate homicide investigation, that evidence exists in documented form within investigative files. If he conducted analysis that supported bypassing standard procedures, that analysis is preserved in official reports within administrative oversight systems. If he continues to receive developments that validate extraordinary resource commitment, those developments are tracked through internal accountability mechanisms that justify ongoing investigation. The foundation exists. The documentation operates. The justification continues. All of it operating within protected investigative channels. All of it maintained through administrative oversight. All of it functioning according to established institutional processes that balance investigation, integrity with accountability requirements. Timeline analysis reveals institutional speed. Evidence analysis remains within protected investigative channels. Decision documentation exists within administrative frameworks. Decision justification operates through established oversight processes. Resource commitment continues through institutional channels. Resource validation functions within administrative accountability systems. If the escalation was justified by evidence, that evidence will eventually validate the timeline. If it was not, the timeline will. Institutional records document every decision. They preserve every justification. And institutional records endure beyond the protection periods that currently shield them from public accountability. Next episode: the evidence that shapes every decision. The institutional calculations that continue to drive resource allocation. The investigative developments that remain beyond public accountability. And what happens when protection meets scrutiny.